Okay, hello, welcome everyone. I want to share our story about how we built a platform engineering team from scratch at our scale-up. I say scale-up, and I mix it sometimes with startup. I don't know what we categorize as. Let's call it the scale-up for today, and you can tell me if I'm wrong later on. If you want to tweet, I am on Twitter as SolidCubes, and the company is Kognic _. And the company that I'm going to tell about, this place where user story takes place, is used to be called Anotel. So on my badge, for instance, it says Anotel. But 2 months ago, we rebranded into Kognic. The company was funded back in 2018, and we're still a fairly small company, I would call us. Our headquarters is in Gothenburg. That's about 3-4 hours north from here. And currently today, we are somewhere around 90 employees and around 45 people in engineering. The reason why I tell you this is because the size of the company matters, right? Because what we have chosen to do is due to the size of the company and how many people we are. Who am I to tell this to you? I'm the product area lead for engineering enablement at Kognic. Engineering enablement is what we call our function of like providing common services and tools to the other developers. And product area lead is just a mouthful, but basically take product engineering management, that's my responsibilities. I used to be a platform engineer myself. I worked hands-on, both back-end developer, etc., for many years, and this has been a lot of fun, starting from scratch. I'm also a CNCF ambassador, and I'm very involved in the meetup communities, both in Gothenburg, where I drive a meetup, but also in what we call the Cloud Native Nordics community. Cloud Native Nordics is like a collection of different CNCF meetups spread throughout the Nordics, both in Iceland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. So I want to tell you a story about, it starts like from when I joined, because we didn't have this function of platform engineering or engineering enablement when I joined. I joined in order to start that up because we realized we're grown to a certain size and we wanted to make sure that we were not reinventing the wheel and that we were still continuing to utilize having common solutions. So basically we had nothing when I joined. Whatever infrastructure was in place was on a need-to-be basis. Like, get it up, get it working, move on to something that we can sell to our clients. Probably someone recognized that if you're working like in a small startup style. A lot of the infrastructure, the last commit on like any committed Git lines was from one of the co-founders, and like the configuration, all the ownership of all the accounts was from one of the co-founders. So that was like my first step, was just take ownership of everything, just remove him, because he was like hard to get time from. He had a lot of things on his plate, and it was really good to just get him out of the systems. He's really good, but I mean, he didn't have time to do development. He had other things to do. So I'm going to tell you about like what did we do to start out, and then I'm going to give you 3 concrete examples and connect it to some of the strategies that we have done. And in the end, this story spins over like a couple of years and kind of wraps up now in September, where we were around 45 people. I'm not sure exactly how many we are today, but somewhere around there, right? So the first step that we did was assess. So this is also the disclaimer part. If any of you are listening to the story and feel like we should do that, head home and like, I heard this talk, they told me that we should use these tools, we should use them. That's not what I'm trying to tell you. Like, forget that right away. I'm trying to tell you, like, listen to what I have to say and think about how that matters in your situation and see if you can figure out what would be the right move for you. So I mean, as I said, I had experience from this before joining this company, but that didn't mean that I went in here and tried to replicate that, because I was coming from a situation where we had 450 people in engineering, and we had a lot more people working with platform engineering and these type of things. We couldn't just take whatever we had from there and replicate that, because we wouldn't have been able to do that. So I spent my first month just trying to listen in, trying to understand what we had, and try to just start taking ownership, running security upgrades on Kubernetes cluster, for instance. And by understanding what we had, like, I probably have an idea of where I wanted us to go, but in order to go somewhere, you need to know where you're starting so that you can figure out what the path is to get there. You can't just pick the finishing line and think that will happen. So understanding where you are before you start. So developer experience, this is pretty much what the talk is about. Is this term familiar to you, like developer experience? Slightly, yeah, okay. So I will spend a little time explaining what I mean by developer experience. Because this is, for me, this is like the sole purpose of platform team, is to provide developer experience. So why do I care about developer experience? As I mentioned, I have a background as a developer myself, and developer experience is like, what is your experience as a developer going from all the parts of building an application? How easy is it for you to start a new application? How easy is it for you to build and package, run tests on that, deploy it to production, understand what's happening to your application? All the things that you have to do as a developer, how easy is it for you to do that? And if we can take one developer and make them more efficient and like have an easier time, that's great. The more developers we have, that we can make it an easier time. A lot of you probably heard of like the 30x developer or the 10x developer. That's like a common term. It's not a great term because that is like a whole different, okay, sorry, I shouldn't brought it up. But the point is, a platform team can turn every developer into a 10x developer. Because the better your platform team is, the better you can create your developer experience, the better you can make your developers. And the more time they can spend on the more important things. I will get more into detail to that. So I mentioned like the different things. This is from, I pulled this out of my head, but from what we are doing with our development teams, these are the things that our teams had to care about. So we have, for instance, we have like CI, CD, that's not the same tool, it's different tools. We have load balancing for applications, a runtime, somewhere to run your code, the business logic, what is this application supposed to do? People probably want metrics, auth, users should be authorized, logging, security, and all these things. This sounds familiar, right? This is what you need to care about. Not everything, there's more things, I know it is, but just to get this symmetric, nice square, right? So what is it that you really want to spend time on as a development team building a product? You want to spend time on the business logic, because this is where your application stands out from the rest. This is where you create value in your application. So how can we make sure that our developers can spend as much time as possible on the purple box and as little time as possible on the white boxes? Because as you can see, the white boxes are plenty more than the purple one. And the answer is, of course, like the golden path to paved road. How many here has heard about the golden path for the paved road before? Yeah, that's also not that many, but a few people, which is great. So the idea is to create a paved road that solves the common needs, and we allow developers to focus on the things that are important. And there are plenty of different talks on this, but among others, I want to highlight a talk by Daniel Bryant at KubeCon in Valencia this spring. There's a link at the last slide as well. I will share that for you later on. And the talk is named From Kubernetes to Pass to What's Next, which is a mouthful, but in this presentation, he really explains why this is powerful and why we should care about these things, which is, I think it was a great talk, and I recommend watching it. So what we're trying to do, I tried to really pick this picture because, as you can see, there's a small, narrow road, and this measures very well what we have, because we are a small team, we can't do a lot of things, but the things we try to do, we try to make it easy. And if you want to, you can burn through the bushes if you want to, but you're going to come out scratched, and it's going to take a long time, or you could stick on the road and it will be easy, and you will get where you want to go faster. I think that's a really good, approximation of what we're trying to do. And in the end, why do we have developers? I love a good developer, but in the end, we want to create business value. As an organization, we want to build something. We want to create some kind of value, and we want to sell it. So we kind of want to make this work out. How does being a small team impact this? Because a lot of companies are working with platform teams. A lot of companies are doing the things that we're doing in a much larger scale, very successfully. Among others, I do know that Spotify is sharing a lot of blog posts around what they're doing, etc., and they have built an open source project I will back to later, etc. So there's a lot of things out there, but as I mentioned in the beginning, we can't just pull something that Google or Spotify or Facebook are doing and try to replicate it, because we wouldn't be able to. So we have to understand what are our limitations, and some of these insights might be a bit uncomfortable, or they were for me when I started out. And the first one is like you can't do all the things. It's like impossible. You will have to be conscious of where you're spending your time, otherwise you will just waste it on something that sounds really cool but doesn't really give you anything. And sometimes the most valuable thing you can do is to not do something. As I mentioned in the beginning, I could have tried to spin up very many cool things when I first joined the company, but in the end, I don't think that would have helped anyone. So, like, not doing something is something, and like, observe, assess, understand your problems, because the problems for the developers in one situation might not be the same as others. In the cloud-native community, there's a lot of really cool projects and tools that you can use. They are updated quite frequently. The more projects you take in, the more things you start relying on, the more time you spend on updating and maintaining and applying security patches and all the things. And if you're not prepared to spend that time on maintenance, you should not take it in. So one of the things that we have to be very conscious about is how many tools do we rely on, because if we take in too many, then we'll just spend time on maintaining them and we don't have the time to develop new things or like take the next step in developer experience. And the last thing is, like, you probably don't need cool tech. It's like you can hear really companies talking about really cool solutions they have. It sounds really awesome. They have like a lot of cool marketing around it. There's t-shirts and everything, and you know that everyone thinks this is the next big thing. But unless you need it, don't start depending on it, because you will have to do all the things above if you start to. And one of these examples for me is service mesh in the cloud native community. It's like a very hot topic. A lot of people have and use the service mesh, but I know for us that is currently not the thing that we need. So that was one of the things that we decided to not rely on. So what has been our approach? Like, what have we decided to do in order to achieve this? And it's simple. It's just, it sounds, I'm not sure how to put it. Like, in my mind, it feels very simple. I hope this makes sense to you. But like removing time-consuming tasks and bottlenecks, it's trying to make it lean. And the first step is unblocking the developers. If developers have to wait for someone or wait for something for a long period of time, then they are not having a good developer experience and they're not able to do what they want to do. This does not make sense. Start by making sure that they can always move forward at their own pace whenever they want to. Second, your team is a bottleneck. Remove time-consuming tasks from your team so they have time to spend on more valuable things. And the third one, once you're done with removing time-consuming things from your team, remove it from the developers. Spend the effort of figuring out what takes a lot of time and effort for these developers and how can we make that easier. So 3 things: remove bottlenecks and blockers, remove time-consuming tasks from the team, and then remove time-consuming tasks from the developers. And when you're done with that, you start over all again, and because you probably developed something new that created a new blocker, whatever it was. So you start all over. And I want to show you some real examples on these. These are 3 projects. Have you heard of them before? Hands up if you have. A few of you. Cool. Thank you. These are things that we started using during these 2 years. And they integrate very well into our infrastructure. I should have mentioned that earlier. We are running on Google Cloud platform, and we are using GKA for hosted Kubernetes, and we are using PubSub for messaging, etc., hosted database solutions, etc. We only have one cloud. We only have one Kubernetes cluster. We only have, we have a very small infrastructure. A lot of the things that I mentioned make sense in that setup. You might need to require other things depending on how your setup looks like. But so these projects, ExternalDNS, Cert Manager, and Argo CD are things that we relied on. And first out is ExternalDNS, and we use this in order to unblock our developers. And the reason being that we were doing a lot of prototyping, like quickly trying to get things out. And the best way of testing something out was to get it to production and play well with the rest. And so you wanted to build something, you wanted to test it, and you wanted to evaluate and see, was this valuable? Do we need to change something? And then start all over. And so getting to production for us often meant that you needed to have a DNS connection, DNS connected to your application. If it was an API, you probably want to have a public API endpoint that the front end could call, etc. So DNS was something that they needed. The process for getting a new DNS for something when you want to try out a new service was that you built your application, you deployed it to Kubernetes with like a fixed load balancer, so you got your IP from Kubernetes. Then you went to one of the 1 or 2 people, out of one was me, and asked, can you please help me get a DNS record for this application that I have? I wanted to have this IP. If you remembered to tell me right away what kind of DNS you wanted, that was quicker. Most of the time people sent, I want a DNS for this new service I have, and I had to get back and say like, okay, which IP, which service, what DNS do you want? And then they got back to me, and it was back and forth. This is a blocker, in case it was unclear. And then, I'm very fast. I replied to Slack really quickly, but sometimes I was in a meeting, whatever, it might have been late in the day, whatever. It could take a bit before it happened. So once they got the DNS record, then they could keep developing, and everyone was happy, except we had the blocker. So we started relying on external DNS. The link will be in the end as well. It is a CNCF project under the Kubernetes SIGs. It's very easy to install if you're running on top of Kubernetes. And what we had to do was that we had to get like an API token from Cloudflare and then configure the secrets and everything and deploy pretty much boilerplate external DNS into our cluster. And what external DNS does is that it adds an additional record into your DNS provider. That is a TXT record that tells basically, I'm owning this record. I'm handling the, in this case, the A record for this DNS. And the reason why this TXT record is important is because this is how external DNS knows that I can manage this resource. So if you have multiple clusters and multiple external DNS instances, they don't overwrite each other. If you have something that is not managed by external DNS will not allow a new service to overwrite the existing record, for instance, which is really great if someone accidentally deploys, I don't know, maybe overwrites your web page, whatever it might be. This is also important because this allowed us to do a really good, easy-to-do migration. Because when we did this, we wanted to also move all of our already existing DNS records that were manually handled into external DNS, because that allows us to, whenever someone wants to remove an application, the DNS record will also be automatically removed. DNS was handled via configuration, Kubernetes configuration, and it was attached as an annotation. You can see the line up there where it says like host name and then a host name. And we have helloargo.domain.com. And this annotation, line of annotation, just that line, was the only thing that a developer had to add to their deployment configuration in order to get a DNS record. And what we needed to do in order to migrate all the existing ones was, first of all, update all existing ones with a DNS record for it. And that was like some hacking to figure out which ones we used, etc. And then we faked the TXT record in Cloudflare and pretending there was external DNS who added it. And then we deployed external DNS and everything worked. And I'm not kidding you, this was 2 weeks of work for one person. That was all it took, and we never cared about DNS again. Pretty much, actually. And in the end, the process looked like you build your application, you deploy it with a configuration, with annotation, and you get your DNS record automatically, and you keep developing. No bottlenecks, no blockers, no waiting for anything. It just works. The upside and the return on investment of this one, summarize, this was self-serve for the development teams. They could manage it themselves. It was extremely easy to use. Like the instant feedback was like, this is so easy, I now can do this all myself, etc. And if we look at like a matrix for return on investment, we have the effect on the left-hand side, with going from low to high, and then we have the investment going from low to high. And this one was a very low investment with a very high return. And with like really high effects. In the end, like a high return on investment. I will have one of these summaries for each of the tools that we used. And yeah, that's the end for ExternalDNS. Next up is Cert Manager. And this one is something that I use as an example of how we remove the time-consuming tasks from the team. And Cert Manager is a tool that you can use for managing your SSL certificates. A lot of fun with SSL certificates. So the process before looked like we had a custom shell script that was like doing things, you run it locally in your terminal, and they create new certificates. And we are using Let's Encrypt. Let's Encrypt certificates expire after 90 days, which means that we, in reality, roll them every 60 days because we didn't want to do it at the last day, just in case something happened, and you want to have time to propagate and all these things. So we were running the manual script every 60 days, that's every other month. And then we manually updated secrets in Kubernetes with the new certificate. And then we had to rule and restart all the deployments because we were terminating SSL inside the containers in Kubernetes. And when you do that, we were loading it up via a secret that was like mounted as a file into the container. And when you do that, that happens in startup, and then it exists as a file inside the container. So if you update the secret that you loaded it from, it doesn't change the mount file. So we had to restart all the containers in order to get the updated secret with new SSL certificate. So every other month we had to manually do a lot of work, remember to do all the steps, and hope nothing broke. We were not happy about that. So what we did was that we looked at Cert Manager. Once again, super easy to get set up, assuming that we're running in Kubernetes. This is an example of our customized file. Customize is a format you can use for applying configuration into Kubernetes. And basically what we do is that we say, like, rely on this remote source based on the official project. And then we add our own file, which is a cluster issuer.yaml, basically telling which is your, where do you get your SSL certificate from, and where do we find the authority for that? How do we check that you own? So we had connection to Let's Encrypt and Cloudflare. Cert Manager can track multiple DNS zones in the same deployment. And around this time, we also changed to ingress resources. Ingress is another Kubernetes resource object. And what it does is that we terminated SSL there instead. And it placed nice in such a way that we didn't have to restart all the things. So in the end, the renewal process for certificates looks like this. This is the only thing I have, no more clicking, because we do nothing. It's like a no-op thing, which is great. So in the end, we removed the manual process, we had less cognitive load on the team, and we did not have to do a restart of all the things. And the return on investment was, I call it medium, because the effect was also kind of low. I mean, it was something we did every other month. It was not that bad, but it was annoying, so we were very happy to get rid of it. Last but not least, we have Argo CD. Hand of check, Argo CD, GitOps. Yes, maybe, some, good. This was for us, deployments were for us something that was very time-consuming for our developers. It took a lot of time for them to do deployments. It was very prone to errors, and we needed to do something. So the process looked like it was very hacky. So first of all, like the build pipeline was connected to Slack, and the build pipeline printed out like there's a new image for this application. So the developers went into Slack, they got the image tag, then they ran, and then they ran a script locally. There was a block box for them, and they told the script this tag and this application. In the background, inside the script, it was doing kubectl set image, which is a live update into the cluster with the new image tag for the deployment. And doing a live edit of the image tag on a deployment triggers a rolling restart of the application. So then the script was doing like check the status of the rollout. And then in the end, it posted back to Slack and said that this application has been updated. So there was 3 different things going on in the script. Most of them broke all the time, to be honest. And the problems were like, as I mentioned, it was a black box. It was very unclear to developers what was happening inside this script. no, so there was a single individual who had written it. Not a lot of people contributed. People were just running it, hoping it worked. So it was really hard for debugging, and it did fail, and it was hard to debug for the developers, and it took some extra time from us as well, because when they failed debugging it, they came to us to ask for help. And there was also like a lacking version control of Kubernetes resources. As I said, it was live editing the cluster, which led to, it was really hard to understand what was deployed and why, because you couldn't track like with the version history when was changes made. Changing the configuration of a deployment was really scary because you didn't know if anyone had live changed anything, and what was in Git was that the thing, because the files were also in Git, but it was not exactly the same that was running in the cluster. And you didn't know if you were overwriting something. And there was really no way to restore in case someone accidentally deleted the deployment. Like, I mean, you know, you've done it. Like, oops, that was not staging, that was production. And then you want to get it back, right? But you didn't know if it was the thing in Git that was actually deployed. Maybe it was something else. Maybe it was running with more replicas now. You didn't know what was the thing. And that really kept me up at night, at least. So what did we want? We wanted to have better transparency. We wanted to empower our developers to be able to debug and maintain this themselves and understand what was going on. We wanted them to spend less time on debugging failures, and we also wanted that. And we wanted to have a more resilient system and know that we could restore in case something happened. So what can give us that? Well, GitOps. Whoa, surprise. If you go to a page that is called, I got it later on, it's coming later on, but it's something around like open gitops.dev. They have like a really good description. So there are 4 steps of what says if something is GitOps. So first of all, it has to be declarative. Like a system managed by GitOps must have its desired state expressed declaratively. It also needs to be version controlled and immutable, and retain like a complete version history. It should be pulled automatically what the desired state is from the source, and then continuously reconciled to make sure that the system matches what is in the source. So yeah, this is the link that I talked about. It will also come on the last slide. And introducing Argo. So how are we going to solve this? So the first step, like YAML files, everyone loves a good YAML file. That's at least it's declarative, right? And then if we put it into GitHub, we put a master branch protection, then it's suddenly immutable, it's version controlled, and it's tracked. And then Argo CD is per definition pulling automatically and continuously reconciling the cluster with the desired states from the declarative files, which is great. This is actually exactly what we wanted. It's also very different from what we had before. Very different. And that's the link that's also in the end. So the migration, I think I'm going to skip that. But basically, it was a lot more work than the other 2, because the other 2 was really easy. This was more work. It was not 2 weeks. And the process after this looked like you got the new latest master tag from your build, and we had a nicely wrapped script that was very clearly what it did. That pulled from Google Container Registry, which we used for storing our images, and you could get like what was the latest. And then you updated your Git configuration for your YAML files with a new tag, and you pushed it. And that was it. That was what developers had to do now. And I mean, of course, it could still break, because maybe you were picking an image tag that didn't exist, or you had a mistake in your configuration or whatever, but you got better error messages. It was easy to understand. It was more streamlined. So in the end, we had a more transparent process for the developers. It was resilient. I feel very confident right now compared to what I did before, and it was easy to use. Let's talk more about that. At the time, it was quite, as I had said, it was like a high investment. It took a lot of time and effort to make this happen, and to make sure that we actually had what was represented, what was existing in the cluster, also represented in code. But the effect was also very high. Having gone from having several people every week ask about why does my deployment not work, I don't remember the last time I saw a question of why does my deployment not work. And that is like a high win. And I also would say that over time, the more time that goes since we introduced the change, the higher the return on investment is, because we spend a very little time maintaining this compared to the value that we get out. So it's over time, it's totally worth the investment. So let's talk about easy to use. It's not technically hard. I think we have a really solid technical solution. But as I mentioned, it's very different from what we did before. And I think we did not fail technically, but we failed culturally when we changed to this system. And we did not make sure that we had the buy-in from the developers before going there. So in the end, they were not as enthusiastic as I was. And I think that was really sad. But a few months later, we had this one, which says, kudos to Plating, that's the team, and their work in making my life easier as a developer. Argo CD, together with automatic DNS and all that good stuff, really helped me today. And this is what you live for. This is what I live for. I want to achieve this, because this means that I really helped one of our developers doing their job much easier than it was before. So I think that over time, we actually reached what we were aiming for. So the things that we more or less stopped thinking about, and that used to be up very often, was DNS record certificates and deployments, and ExternalDNS, together with Cert Manager and Argo CD, has greatly reduced the time we spend and effort we spend on that. So much that I would say like almost nothing, unless see rebranding. If you rebrand, you're probably going to update all your DNS records, move everything, get new certificates and all the things, and honestly, that is where we spend some of the effort. I think it was so much easier having those tools than it would have been without. But I couldn't with a good conscience say that we haven't worked with these questions over the last few months, because we have. But while we're not sure exactly what the future will look like, it's still a challenge being a small platform team. I think we're doing a lot of good things, and we will continue following our strategy of unblocking the developers, removing the time-consuming tasks from the team, and in the end, remove time-consuming tasks from developers. And I hope that this will continue to provide great value to our developers. And if you have any comments, I would love to hear them. Thank you.